Thank you. Hi. I'm Evan McGonigal, and I work in special collections and for collegewomen.org, which is a project that originated with Bryn Mawr College and includes all the Seven Sisters colleges. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the site and the goals of the site and its design, and straddle a little bit presenting the site itself and talking about behind the scenes decisions and project management questions and things that are still evolving about the site, because it's currently in progress, and what's online live right now is actually a beta version that we're going to be expanding continuously for the next 8 or 9 months until we run out of grant funding and figure out what happens after that. So, College Women is it's at this URL, and it's currently live, so you can already go visit it. And the goal of the project is to unite the collections of the Seven Sisters from items pertaining to their founding until currently about World War II. And those would include diaries, letters, scrapbooks, and photographs, also photo albums. And in some cases we have interesting items that are hybrids of those distinct types of items, like scrapbooks that contain letters or photographs, diaries that have things inserted into them. But these are the main broad categories. And our goal is to give users a lens into all of the different institutional collections that contain those items. So under one portal at collegewomen.org, you can search, and you can search common keywords and terms that will search across every item that's in the database, and then send you out to Vassar, to Mount Holyoke, or to Bryn Mawr's local repository where the items in their original form is stored. So it's less of a huge comprehensive database and more of a curated small portal that gives you a lens onto existing resources that are already all out there, but haven't yet been put in dialogue in this way. And in fact, they're not all out there. All of the repositories are out there, but our current phase of the project is all about digitizing new content and recataloguing new and old content so that it can be put on the local repositories and then into College Women. So this project includes a mission to expand the available content that's in some cases only in physical form at the separate archives at which they're originally stored. So we hope to make this resource really rich for teaching and for research. It should be available to anybody for free, so everyone can already access these resources by, driving to each Seven Sisters school. But given that that's not something we can all undertake, and that not all of the collections that are online are cataloged in compatible languages, we're trying to make them speak to one another in a way that illuminates new questions and new commonalities or newly visible differences between the collections. This should be a project about women's educational history, but also a project about looking beyond that a little bit. So what constitutes women's culture? What has constituted education or special educational missions in the past? How do those fit in with their contemporary history? And how can learnings from those historical moments expand to apply to our current day? Women's education, even though it seems like it was a topic of debate hundreds of years ago, and it was, is still somehow on the table and is constantly evolving, just as higher education in general is constantly evolving in America and in the world. So we hope to provide a resource that can be about historical study, but also very much relevant to the present day. So to give some background on the project itself, the Greenfield Digital Center for the History, the Albert M. Greenfield Digital Center for the History of Women's Education was around for several years, based at Bryn Mawr College, and began a new effort to look into our collections and with a special eye towards the history of women's education, illuminate some of those items that we already held and apply the questions to digital humanities and to current historical work at and beyond the college. So out of that effort grew a grant proposal, spearheaded by Jennifer Redmond, who was the director at the time in 2013 when we began working on this project. And we applied for and received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which gave us about $40,000 to begin work on this project. And at the time, we weren't sure exactly how far we were going to get. So it was just a planning grant about what will this project look like and how do we want to bring our items together in a way that makes sense and provides additional value beyond what users already have access to. And what we discovered is that building the site was complex, but the real task was going to be figuring out our standards for description and deciding what level of consistency was going to be important between all the items and anticipating what researchers were going to find valuable about the items. So building a website needed to take all of those things into account and anticipate users' questions and needs. But in order to do that, we were going to have to think really deeply in advance about those questions and needs. And a lot of our time went to planning in that way, and we're still doing that even though the website is live. So we got another grant after launching the site to expand our digitization effort and our description and cataloging, and also to build a tool that could allow us to harvest more efficiently, with the goal of also making that available to other collaborative projects. We found ourselves in a unique position, and in searching for other precedents, models that we could use, we didn't find anything directly comparable. So we thought that it would be a service to the community for other collaborative archives projects, for other institutions looking to pursue similar work, if we could build generic tools that could be repurposed and made open source and freely available for other types of projects trying to accomplish something similar. So currently we're in the middle of that grant. We've been scanning, we've been describing, we've been having tons and tons and tons of meetings, and the site still looks the same way that it did in summer of 2015, but we're right on the cusp of a new ingest that will see a lot of content coming into the site. So hopefully sometime actually this week, possibly next week, Wellesley and Vassar will be uploading a lot of letters and photographs, something like 850 or 1,000 photographs, and then several hundred letters and diaries will be up on the site. And other institutions will follow, so that should be very exciting. Currently it's about 320 items that are mostly photographs with some letters and diaries. So I thought I would pull out an example of how the items on college women can be used to enhance historical research regarding women's educational history, which is of course a narrow and kind of obvious topic, but it fits in with the work that the Greenfield Digital Center had begun, and what we were thinking about when we originally designed the site would be examples like this would be sort of the low-hanging fruit. So in the context of women's educational history in the US, there was a lot of debate about whether it was actually safe for women to study at high demanding levels of intellectual caliber. So there was a man who was actually a Harvard-educated doctor named Edward H. Clarke, and in 1873 he published a text saying women are not capable of study because even if they can do it, and even if they can somehow measure up to men, it might be physically damaging to them because the amount of blood that it takes to power the brain will drain all of their circulation and resources away from the development of the fertility organs, which he thought were sort of on hold until puberty and or sometime after puberty. So we would be seeing actually a race suicide kind of question. And that, of course, leads to questions about who is being educated, who is really at risk here, what kinds of women are we worrying about not being able to reproduce, who has the privilege to be worried about in this way in the first place. So that was in 1873, which is only a couple of years before the founding of Wellesley, I believe. I think it was Smith actually was in 1865. Wellesley and Vassar were founded in or it was Vassar 1865, Wellesley and Smith in 1875. So this is right in between those. And it's a really pivotal moment for women's institutions because they're all thinking about how do we position ourselves so that people actually want to send their daughters to study with us and provide evidence of the fact that they're not being damaged and that this is successful or can be successful and important. And I pulled a random image from College Women that shows a gymnastics class that I think was at Mount Holyoke. And it shows that women were very active at school. That was actually a very prominent part of women's higher education, was a lot of athletics classes, a lot of basketball, once basketball was invented in 1891, a lot of gymnastics. And the fact that it's one of the most commonly available resources in our archives shows how actively and self-consciously it was being documented. That people understood this to be a kind of an important PR mission, that they had to document that women were staying physically active and that they could hold up the intellectual side as well. So that's just a sample glimpse into the kind of look that College Women could provide that might shed light on other historical topics that were contemporary. So there's another, I'll just bring up College Women itself and find another example. So this is the site. I guess I should have introduced this at the beginning. This is the home page. You can see that it has a little bit of information about the institutions and some sample blog articles that we're working on, a glimpse into the collections, but the main feature really is this search bar. And in fact, there's an advanced search bar as well. So if I was doing research on a topic like Edward H. Clarke and women's education from a physical perspective, I might start by typing in the word physical. And we're getting 12 items back, including mostly photographs, because as I mentioned, that's most of the content in the site currently. Also several letters. So if I click on sample letter, I did cheat, I know what's in this letter. You can see some basic metadata about the item and an image of it on the left. And if we expand over here, there's a transcript of the letter, which goes all the way down the page. And Virginia is talking to her mother about a physical exam. So highlighting from here to the end, you can read, she says, the physical exam, we had to do everything from catching baseballs thrown from a machine in different directions to jumping hurdles, throwing baseball, a basketball, and climbing monkey fashion to test the strength of our arms, which I passed. And my shoulders are of equal height. The only thing wrong with my posture is that my head should be held higher and pushed back straighter, so I walk around with my head in the air. And I love that letter. She's clearly developing pride, and she's measuring up, and it also is just a great example of how much they were asked to do, and how much it was not about enjoyment. It was thought to be very scientific, right? It was all about measurement and passing tests and measuring posture, because posture was partially manners, but it was also partially sort of physical aptitude. So that is one way to search the site. You can go to the advanced search window, you can type in a keyword, and it will bring up items that have that keyword in the title, the description, or the transcript. But you can also play around with a bunch of other little pieces of metadata. So there are scrapbooks, letters, diaries. So I'll put in letters and academics as a subject. You can restrict by institution, so maybe I'm interested only in Wellesley, Vassar, Bryn Mawr, and Mount Holyoke. And let's just see what we get. This is not a canned search, so I don't, yeah, okay, so nothing. But you can find little ways of playing around. So if I take out this and put in that I'm interested only in 1885 to 1915, items from those four institutions, you can filter it down and you can narrow what you're seeing. So if I click search again, it'll bring up the same window. I could adjust my search specifications. I can decide I'm really only interested in a 5-year period, restrict by subject or keyword. And you can also do a little bit of searching, or browsing really, sorting, I guess, by the browse window. So if I click on this from anywhere on the site, so going back to the home page, if you click up here on browse, it'll take you to the browse page, which is, oh, Wellesley uploaded. There are 100 new items on the site. Great. Wonderful. That's an exciting update. For the first time since 2015, there's new content. So you can sort up and down by date or by institution. So since I just sorted from the bottom up, now we're looking only at Wellesley, but if I search again, it'll go Barnard, just alphabetically first. And then there are other ways that you can sort, sort of threading through the different collections. So all these subject headings, most of them are Library of Congress headings. Some of them are a little bit kookier, but if you search for racism, that's the only that's the only one that comes up. But the intention of this feature is that you should be able to click on something and see all the other items that fit under that subject heading. So if you find something by chance, searching by subject heading or browsing by subject heading should allow you to kind of meander your way through the collections and find unexpected connections or things that you weren't necessarily interested in before, but you find constantly come up when you're doing your searches under the subjects. A little bit like a Wikipedia rabbit hole. At least I get lost sometimes on Project College Women in the rabbit hole. So back here. Browsing by theme is another option. This is presentation mode.
One more to the right.
This one?
Yeah.
Thank you. So you can also browse by theme. And let's see. I'll go into themes a little bit later. First I'll just explain what we decided to put on the item page. So this is a big topic of conversation in designing the site. We were trying to figure out what the important pieces of information were. So not just everything that we know about the item, but what are going to be the things that best make connections between the different items from different institutions. Since the purpose of the site isn't really to collect everything that we have, but to show commonalities or contrasts, it made sense to pick things that would be descriptive of the items but weren't necessarily so in-depth that they would be more confusing to the reader or more burdensome. So we picked a really basic list that was easy to standardize. So title, institution, subjects, which I've already discussed, themes, which I'll get to in a minute, contributor, which is just the creator who took this picture, who wrote this letter, date, format, copyright, and citation, and then the link to the original, which I'll point to. So here in this case, what you're looking at is the picture itself. It's the whole thing. It's everything that you want to see. But if you go back to a letter, let's see, or diary, you'll notice that we actually only have access on College Women to this first page, and it's not really interesting. It's not the content that we're interested in seeing. This is because we don't have the storage space to store the entire item on College Women itself, and because it's a portal, it's supposed to point you outwards. So instead of trying to page through this diary on College Women, there's a link to the original item. You can also click directly up on the image itself. And it takes us out to Vassar. So we're no longer on collegewomen.org, but we're viewing the item in its sort of natural habitat. And here, you can click through page by page. You can view the transcript if there is one. You can see the handwriting itself. You can search inside. Not every institutional repository has that, but Vassar is a model example. So, you can search for whatever transcript is available to find the point that you're looking for.
Excuse me. In addition to searching by theme, can you search the text strings of the transcribed documents?
So there's a complex answer to that. For items that have transcripts, you can search them just by keyword searching for the site. So when I type in physical into the search bar, it will bring up anything that has that in the transcript. But we don't have a way to search only the transcripts. And we're thinking about taking transcripts out of the site, which will influence searching in a whole new way. So I'll be talking about that in a couple of slides. But currently, yes, the transcripts pick up all the search terms and feed you items that have those. So that's kind of what the item looks like, but you actually do have to go out to Vassar's site to view the item in its full form. So here, getting a little bit more into the behind-the-scenes decision-making process, we were thinking about what kinds of things would help people find the topics that they were interested in as research topics, which meant thinking about what are researchers who are interested in these items, what kinds of questions are people going to be asking. And all of our local repositories already have subject headings. We all apply cataloging standards already in our libraries. So people have mostly Library of Congress, but also some other kind of weird local conventions. And we decided it wasn't really worth our time to try and apply a new layer of subject headings that were specific for college women. So it wouldn't be about cleaning everything up so that it's perfect on the site. So there are weird, quirky things that you find in the subject headings. But the themes we designed to be totally uniform, and that's not something that's imported, but something that we made a custom list of topics that we thought people would be interested in viewing or browsing and researching. And they're a little bit more subjective. So rather than, does this contain a proper noun, a person, a famous person, or does this apply to the Greek games or Olympics or something like that, themes might contain something like student life, or arts, music, and dance, or female friendship and personal relationships is a theme that we thought would be important to people studying these. So that's a whole other layer of searching that we added on, so you can browse by theme and click to view only items that are related to athletics and physical education, and then filter it in from there. So restricting by date, or seeing only items that fall under the theme for physical education, and the theme for academics would be interesting.
How many themes?
I think there are 15 themes.
15?
Yeah. So we tried to keep it narrow enough so that we could sketch out the broad categories of items that are in the site. Conceivably, there are items that don't really fit into any themes, although student life is kind of broad enough to be a catch-all. And there are some items that fit into many, many themes. But the 15 that we picked seemed to cover most of the topics that we were seeing as we explored the collections ourselves. And I can show you the list of themes, actually. So these are all the themes that we have right now. So home and family would cover a lot of things about writing to parents and summer vacations and travel and missing home. Traditions, obviously of importance at most of our schools. You can imagine there would be a lot of overlap between personal relationships and home and family, but also examples where personal relationships would be absolutely applicable and home and family would not. We were struggling with whether to create a category for romantic relationships, and especially for smashes, which was the 19th century term for crushes between or on women, by women. So we figured out that that wasn't going to really work because it was too subjective. And there are too many cases where we can't definitively say what the nature of that relationship was. But personal relationships is a theme that we can use to draw attention to an interesting piece of content. And then the description on the item itself might be a little bit more illuminating. And we're trying to, so that's an example of a way in which we're trying to navigate a difficult topic. Another one is race, another one is gender, where we want to give researchers avenues into these very interesting, very important topics, but we don't necessarily want to be the interpretive layer that excludes some things from interest in that category and includes others. So saying this item is about race because it has a black student in it is not the kind of work that we want to be doing in the structure of the site. How do you tag one thing related to race and not tag every other thing that has a person in it related to race, because every person has an experience of race. So we're trying to find ways of using the themes to give people tools to navigate the site themselves, but also building other supplementary resources that can help them get a little bit more insight into topics like those and others that might be of particular interest, but that Library of Congress cataloging standards can't really do the full job of describing or giving access to.
Not to be argumentative, but to think of it's been distilled down to 15 themes, it makes me even more want the ability to text search for terms for the unanticipated themes that in the future some researcher may be interested in that don't come under the 15. Why would you want to take away the ability to search those?
So that's actually exactly what I was hoping we would discuss on this next slide. So supplementary information, such as transcripts, indexes, and or finding aids, has been a huge topic of conversation for the last few months. And currently, as you've seen, we have the ability to have transcripts on the site, but only a few items have those transcripts. And that's partially because it's so labor intensive to provide them, and the different schools are already working with different resources and different numbers of textual items and limited capacity to produce transcripts at standard. So we noticed that transcripts weight the search results heavily. So when you're searching for a term, maybe even a generic one like food, you might get a lot of items that have transcripts, but miss key items that actually are maybe related to your topic, but don't have the textual volume to stand up in the search results. It also leads to institutional bias, because Vassar has lots of transcripts, Barnard doesn't. And so you're going to get a lot more Vassar items than Barnard items, and what you're not going to see is Vassar and Barnard items next to one another. Indexes we've considered for diaries, because as you saw with the textual items, these are in some sense the richest things that we have in the site, but the hardest to show in their full capacity for interest on the site itself, because we can't hold the whole item there and we can't provide a transcript for everything. So an index for a long diary might be a great tool. Then again, that adds another display challenge, another challenge for how do we handle that in the search results without drowning out the pictures or the items from Radcliffe. And so one thing that we've been thinking about doing is adding in a link to finding aids instead of transcripts. So the search function might not work to uncover all of the words in the items, but you will be able to search descriptions, and descriptions we're trying to put the emphasis on building those out and making them higher quality, longer, more in depth. So if it's related to something strongly enough to mention it in the description, that will help bring that item up, and every item on the site should have description. And then if you click on that item and it has a link to the finding aid, you can further explore that item, similar items, and a little bit more of the archival hierarchy and structure and context around that item at Vassar or Radcliffe or wherever it's held. We've had to really pull back from trying to provide everything in one place, because we realized that that was impossible to actually give access to all of the value of the items. But we are trying to find this compromise. How do we make these things exposed and navigable to the user without being really unwieldy or overwhelming or detracting from the original goal of the site, which is to be about linkages rather than the deep zoom for everything. But that's still under debate, and so definitely we're looking for opinions and reactions and wish lists. So the other thing that we're trying to do to enhance that type of content is our own self-authored content. So blog posts, research guides, like we know that people are going to be interested in race. Here are a number of really interesting items that deal with race that we know are on the site. Here is a long list of things that suggest alternative expressions of gender in the 19th century that we take responsibility for having selected. So it's a little bit more of a transparency, rather than tagging it race on the site. We're going to say, we think that this is about race, or this tells a story about race. Social media we'll also be using for collection highlights. So here's a cool item. We think it's cool because feel free to explore it on the site or at Vassar's site. These are all the different tools that we're going to be deploying sort of in dialogue with one another to help people find interesting things or to just explore things that they might not have known they were interested in. And that leads me to my final slide, which is I would love to ask people to think about what you would like to see, what would be useful to you as a researcher or a teacher, what you think would work for your needs, what you're curious about, and that's all. So Beth is going to give a short presentation. Sorry I took more time than I thought.
Okay.
In which she lays out some ideas for possible uses of the site for research and teaching. And then hopefully we can all talk.
So I'm Beth Seltzer. I'm the ed tech specialist here. And thank you, Evan, for bringing me into this. Basically, I got the very fun job of trying to imagine some different sorts of enhancements for the site. What would we kind of want to see, and put together some samples for you. Apologies to a few people who were there at the Bucknell conference over the summer. You've already seen some of this. And also, just as a disclaimer, this is based on the data from the summer, so some of it, as we know, the site has expanded even as we have sat here. So it might be a little bit inaccurate, but it'll give you an idea. So basically, there were two kinds of things. There were two types of possible resources that I found really exciting. One was little teaching modules, where, as Evan was talking about, would bring together some historical texts, some like broader context, along with curated collections of things from the site to make some really interesting juxtapositions. And the other is data. Is there a way we can integrate some like easily downloadable data sources into the site to help scholars who are interested in doing more digital sort of work? So this is like just a really quick slide I put together on what Evan was talking about with the physical bodies of the women. You see, you can imagine just like a couple of historical articles, a couple of books. You can even just link out to them and combine it with these photographs and diary entries, really expressing what it was actually like and how the colleges were representing it. So that's one example. Another example of this is a really quick Omeka site that I built. Another example of a sort of teaching module we could put together is something that lets you compare how the 7 different schools. That's one of the things that is so exciting to me about this database, is that you have these 7 very different colleges that were all developing kind of in reaction to each other. Is there a way to track that in the database through maybe little online exhibits or more material? This is a site, and this is something you could do with students to have them build this sort of thing that puts together objects with their metadata and also lets you embed them in a site. So for example, Mount Holyoke was initially imagined as a seminary for women, and there were very strict disciplinary codes. There were very kind of strict rules about what women could do hour by hour. So you could kind of combine some of that historical context with something like the list of forbidden actions at the seminary, which is this kind of fun document that's talking about, being awake before the morning bell rings, could get you in trouble, or speaking too loudly. This is back in the 1890s. So, and then you can take this sort of context and combine it with something like Bryn Mawr, which was not built to be a seminary. It was built more along the lines of a male college, with the idea of having the same scholarly rigor and to sort of and kind of tried to disconnect itself from some of the seminary tradition, and you can see kind of how the women talk and how they're represented in these early texts. So it's a little hard to see, but they're all sort of sitting around studying and drinking tea. Curated content, and if we do want to do curated content, what would be most interesting to people? What would be most valuable? And what sort of form would it be in? Is this something that you'd want to do on kind of a separate site? Is it something that you'd want just kind of as a collection of links on the site? How would we do that? The other thing, which I thought was kind of exciting, is curated data. So I have two different sorts of data sets that I put together using College Women. And these are just on my website for now because they're very, very rough. But one thing I put together was the sample data set of letters. And you see this is like it's a very small data set. It's just like the link, it's the title, the school, and then a naming convention, right? And then I saved this as a zip collection of plain text files. So it's just the text, the transcripts from the site. And from there, if you have this zip collection, let's see if we can do it. What you should be able to do is plug it into a site like Voyant, which is it's a really fun, really easy to use site that basically counts the number of words that it sees in this corpus and lets you and displays things about it. So as you'll see, hopefully if it loads, it's kind of counted the words and the documents from the zip file. And then one of the funnest things is it puts together these word clouds. Let me just expand this a little bit. So you can see what words the women writing these early letters use most frequently in the letter. So it's like obviously bigger. So I was just looking at this and I found it so fascinating as something to even talk about in a class. Like why are these the words that are used by these women? Why are they talking about home and morning and room and college and time and think? How are these you could interpret it a couple of different ways as sort of the domestic world that is being created in this college. And there are a lot of fun things you could do. This is a very tiny data set, but if you had a sort of bigger data set, very easy to put it in and start kind of playing around with it. Any questions so far? And I'm going through kind of quickly because.
Is this all are these all Vassar or these are multi-institutional?
These actually, yeah, they're multi-institutional. They're actually mostly Wellesley because when I was going through, I found a lot of Wellesley
noticing
letters.
that Wellesley was mentioned in there, but I didn't see it was a Vassar letter, so I wasn't sure if it was Vassar was gossiping about Wellesley.
Yeah, it's not a very even data set if you look at it. I think there was a collection of Wellesley letters that I think you had pointed out to me, so I kind of brought those in, and I was like, oh, I'll throw in a couple more that I found on the way, and then.
Just on Voyant, you can put in just about any text, and it'll make a modal out of the.
You can indeed, yeah. You can put in novels that you found from Project Gutenberg. You can put in texts or, Twitter feeds.
And by clicking on the word, it will take you to the instance.
Yeah. So you'll have to. I don't want it to turn into too much of a Voyant tutorial, is it? But yeah, you can look in and it'll show you like a list of like. This is where it appears. You can see the words surrounding it, and then you can kind of see every, even going through this, the word "the" appears 55 times. It's a really neat tool, and it's a very fun thing for the classroom. Another thing you can do, so I put together this data set, which is a little bit more elaborate, of academic images. So basically what I did for this was I picked the 50 images that at the time were in the academic category and put together some sort of standardized data about them, just kind of observing what they said. So some things, it's the length, the title, the year, which is in there a couple different ways. I can explain that in a second. But I tried to sort of find things that could sort of be standardized. So are they indoors or outdoors? What academic subject are they doing? I counted the number of people in each photo and how many of them seem to be smiling, just as one sort of very rough indicator of perceived enjoyment. And I tried to clean it up a little bit to make it a little bit easier to analyze. So you see that there's like the year from the database, there's a clean version of the year, and there's also a version that's just like what decade it's in. And what you can do if we have a data set like this that's tied to the site in some way is you can do some neat stuff with pivot tables. So, as my very quick pivot table introduction. So anywhere here, you insert pivot table, and a pivot table is basically a tool for comparing different sorts of data on a spreadsheet like this. So for example, suppose I wanted to see, without counting, like how many pictures I have from each college. All you do is you drag that, and you see, okay, I have the row, and then there's this values field, which is basically a count. You kind of drag it in, and there, like right off the bat, I've seen, okay, these are the schools where the picture's from. Let's see, for whatever reason, there are 25 not Holyoke pictures with this, with the academic label category. So it's not a very even data set. And then from there, you can sort of figure out, well, what if I want to know how many appeared in which date? Okay, well, that's like not the most useful information, right? But that's like, maybe there's one using some of my clean data that'll let me see, okay, this is when the pictures we have in the database are found. So the point I'm trying to make with this very, very quick pivot table introduction is once you have a data set like this, in here you can start to experiment with it and find out kind of neat things. So a few things that one's not super interesting. Found, this one was kind of fun. So this was, I looked at my students, the number of students smiling compared to the academic subject that they were in. So you can see, and this does not mean that like students in this time period loved the arts more than they loved physical education or taking tests. Although I think it's interesting that only 4% of students taking tests are shown smiling. But it just kind of gives you a sense of like how these things are represented, which could kind of lead, it could be the first step to further research. Maybe in this kind of tense environment where people weren't really sure about women's colleges and women's scholars, maybe it was easier to represent women in the arts looking happy than women in the sciences, for example. Maybe this was somehow more comfortable for the people taking the pictures. Yeah, I think that is my super fast demo. I'm happy to talk through any of the things in more detail. But the basic idea here is like, here are some of the possibilities. What's going to be most useful? How can the site be enhanced with the material that's going to be really interesting?
So yeah, if anybody wants to stick around for conversation or ask questions or offer strong objections to the transcripts, yeah, please let me know now and follow up by email anytime you want. Always looking for feedback.
Are there any questions or comments now? Any ideas for things you'd like to see?
I think I've said this before too, but like exporting data I think is going to be really important, and not necessarily you've enhanced that data set quite a bit right, personally, but just from the search results, being able to do an advanced search and then export that data so you could upload it to them, like I said, I think would be really useful.
Yeah, that's high on my wish list too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Omeka does it, which is the back end, right? Or a version of it. Yeah, it is triple. There's still ways of doing it, obviously, which is, I know it takes a lot of resources.
Well, it might be one of those things where depending on things that are either in the public domain or that we have permission, legal permissions to use. So different institutions are taking different approaches to that, as we all do with our home repositories anyway. With our Bryn Mawr collections, what we're doing is individually pursuing next of kin for every single family of letter and diary and scrapbook authors. That's time consuming. We're not doing that for people depicted in photographs or photographers. Like that's one step beyond. But our official policy is also a takedown policy. So if anybody says, I object to this letter about my great aunt being on your site, we will say, okay, we will take it down. That policy is going to be on the site explicitly in our materials, but it is sort of institution by institution.
Is anyone objecting?
I mean, no, partially I think because a few reasons. The site is tiny so far, and a lot of the people who might object, I think, haven't discovered it. Also, names of people. I haven't done a test yet to see like search engine optimization. Like, if I search for Virginia Westfeld, does her college women letter collection come up? I don't know yet. So I don't know how much that's really going to come up, especially because because our cutoff date currently is the end of World War II. Most of these people, I mean, all of them are dead. Most of them have living relatives, but they're like great or grandchildren or great grandchildren for the earliest graduates. So we're not anticipating a lot of objections, but that's also partially because the site remains small. And also, I think most of the people we've contacted have been very enthusiastic. So we've written letters and received letters back saying, "This is so cool. Tell me when Grandma's stuff is up there. I really want to know whether she was failing French or everything she got out of her classes." And there isn't a whole lot of super controversial subject matter in the letters because a lot of it is written to parents anyway. So I mean, it depends on. That's not 100% true. I mean, there's some people who are writing detailed accounts of crushes on women to their parents. I can think of at least one example of that, and another, two more that are all in diaries. So they were private, but who knows, what the granddaughter of Mabel Converse thinks about books as a sophomore.
Is that part of why the date range is sort of cut off around World War II, or are there other reasons around that?
Yeah, part of it was that we knew we would all have content from that time, so rather than make it a much broader time frame where only 3 out of 5 or 7 of the institutions would have rich resources, we wanted to create as much overlap as possible. So we tried to restrict in a few meaningful ways that would create more connections between the collections, and that was one way. Another was, and related to that, creating connections, we wanted to be able to create subject headings and themes that would apply to that date range. And then in the future we might expand that, but we wanted it to be manageable from the beginning, at least for the first couple rounds of interests. And another one was definitely related to things in the domain, things that are likely to be easier to post. Yeah.
It's also a privacy issue because the more you get into the 1950s and 1960s, it's not just the writer who is still alive or may still be alive, but everybody she's writing about is most of them are still alive. And so the more we can push it back, and actually there isn't that much stuff aside from photographs that's in the 30s and 40s. It's really much more the first few decades, with the idea that we're really focusing on these first generations of women who go to rigorous academic institutions and have plans, or at least think they're going to go on and do something in public life at a time when they're the first generations who have these kinds of opportunities, and their mothers for these kinds of opportunities. And so that's what we pitched to NEH, to see why these letters and diaries and surveys.
And people said some neat things too.
It's an ongoing project that I'm still thinking back to the 15 themes and thinking of researchers who may ask unanticipated questions that were very well defined by the 15 themes. I don't know whether it's going to be shoes or something, but I know, for example, a researcher who was very interested in the beginning of deans of women, the first deans of women, and how that became a role in American colleges and issues like parietals and things like that. And I'm wondering two things. One is the inaccessibility of some things because you don't want to skew the results by taking the transcripts off. I wonder if you could just warn people that this is going to be shaped by how much is posted by different institutions and let them have access to word search. And another possibility that's easier than transcribing is to grab some keywords for each document. In a large project, I've seen 15,000 documents. There was a calendar sheet made of every document and then key topics that were discussed without any sort of uniform vocabulary, whatever came up in the letter, made it possible to find things that were much more narrowcast than 15 themes. And it might be easier than transcribing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what the subject headings accomplish. Yeah, because the goal of the subject headings, first of all, they're not restricted by, we don't have a maximum number of subject headings. So those are applied locally. So there might be some variation in how many is customary to apply at Bryn Mawr versus at Vassar, but those will pull out relevant things, topics of interest, things that get mentioned a lot, things that seem.
So multiple ones per letter.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the themes are not meant to cover every single thing that the letter might be related to or that might enhance the researcher's question. I would say we absolutely want people to be asking the unexpected questions, and for that reason we can't possibly create the themes that will anticipate those questions, and we're not even going to try. We're really interested in talking with researchers to see what they want to ask with these items, and that will shape things like theme and description for sure. But and the description too will be a field of keywords basically. So there are other ways in which the search will still pull things up, but the themes are meant as sort of a browsing tool to see what the different collections of items look like when they're just sorted different ways, in ways that we think really do describe generalities about the college experience during that time. Sort of a window into the collections that filters along different views, but doesn't restrict or really help someone hone a really specific question and isn't designed to. We're hoping to build other ways to do that for sure, like research guides, and also ultimately all these things link back to the collections at their own institutions where any reader can dig much deeper. So it is complex though.
No,
Struggle
I
with
actually,
balance.
your subject terms sound very much like the kind of keywords I was suggesting